Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, I'm pleased to welcome two guests here on the Sourcing Hero podcast. One is a new guest, and one is a returning friend that I think many listeners will recognize. Our new guest is Tarek Alaruri. He is the co-founder and COO of Fairmarkit, a sourcing platform that leverages automation to bring tail spend under management. And Tarek is joined by Greg Tennyson, who is currently the SVP of Strategy and Procurement, also at Fairmarkit. So Greg and Tarek, thank you both so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Kelly.
So Tarek, for folks that haven't met you, can you provide a little bit more detail about your background experience bringing us up to this point?
Yeah, of course. I grew up in Michigan, probably the best state in the country. And I went to the University of Indiana where I wrestled and I was a chemistry major. I got into sales for a third-party logistics firm called TQL, opened an office there in Atlanta, was one of their top sales reps, and realized just the complexities of supply chain when I'd fax paperwork to and from shippers, trying to track down ships at sea and handle domestic truckers, and realized technology has a huge part to play in this space moving forward. So I went to work for a company called Turbonomic. It was an application platform that works in data centers in the cloud. I met my co-founder, Kevin Frechette. We noticed that no two companies pay the same price. And when we actually dug in, it was, less of, hey, am I getting a good price? But more of we don't have bandwidth to get the price. And so we built a platform to help handle that.
So I would just like to acknowledge, first of all, I heard you when you said Michigan was the best state in the country. Those are fighting words, but we will hold that debate for another conversation. Greg, you've been on with me previously, but you've had some professional updates since then. So bring us all up to date since the last time we spoke.
Sure. I had been advising Fairmarkit since 2017 when Tarek and Kevin reached out to me at a conference. And for the last 4 years, have been watching how they've been growing, developing the product and winning customer. Some very notable customers at that. So I joined in August of 2021 as their SVP of Strategy and Procurement. I play a myriad of roles, but having some fun at Fairmarkit right now.
Which is great. And so it's nice that we've kind of spoken with you, or will have spoken with you on sort of both sides of this world of procurement where we've got providers and practitioners. I think that actually adds a lot of value to the conversation that we'll be able to have today. And Tarek, what I'm really interested to hear from you first, I know earlier this year, we finally started having some industry events where GASP people have returned to conferences in person, like walking with their feet into hotels and conference centers. And I'm curious, what has it been like going back to face-to-face networking and conferences?
Sorry, it's been great. I've enjoyed seeing customers, prospects. I was traveling a little bit during the pandemic, especially internationally, just depending on the country or the state and how customers or people feel. Some conferences are an absolute smash, as in they have more people than I've ever seen. So like procurement leaders, and then some other conferences who I won't name names have been quite a dud with maybe only like 15 to 20 people.
Okay.
I think there's an overall sense of urgency, but also a little bit of a kind of what do I do now type of moment going on in the industry, which is really interesting to hear from people because I think everybody's really seeking for more depth than you get at a typical conference. So there's a lot of activity going on outside of just the sessions where, you hear the same buzzwords all the time, which is, engage stakeholders, create a category management strategy, et cetera, et cetera. It's like conference bingo.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. You forgot strengthen supplier relationships. That's always a good square on your conference bingo card.
Yeah,
And
let's not tell anybody how to do it.
depends on how good the prizes are, Tarek. So I like the fact that you talk about this sense of urgency and the wondering what I do now. I've always been someone that while you might choose to go to an event based on the speaker names or the brands that will be there, maybe even session titles, the most interesting stuff always happens in line for coffee, in line for lunch. Um, are those the kinds of conversations in terms of what do I do now that the attendees are having with each other, or are those the kinds of questions that you've heard being posed to session speakers?
I think it's both, but mostly outside. I would say I think supply chain in general right now is a very interesting area. So, you look at retail in the United States, especially like Target and Walmart, and you have an extremely high level of inventory. You look at oil and gas, and they're trying to keep up with production and even figure out how to increase production upstream and downstream. And then you have companies that are very margin focused, specifically like chemicals or production. And they're having to manage, multinational areas of concern, gas production in Germany and France. Like, how is that going to play into their margin? How are they going to be able to survive? And so I think people are trying to get to specific people or specific questions that are more verticalized in what their business does, and trying to, kind of find out or learn tips of the trade that are, outside of just those keynote presentations, so to speak.
Yeah, and goodness knows there's enough that we're all trying to deal with right now. In fact, Greg, we were chatting before we officially started to record about the fact that here on July 13th, as we're all sitting down, the new year-over-year inflation numbers were released, and we're officially at a 9.1% inflation rate. So to channel what Tarek was just talking about in terms of sense of urgency, I feel like I need to ask you, what do we do now?
Yeah, it's the highest inflation rate in 41 years.
It's incredible.
It is incredible. And honestly, a lot of us, myself included, I've never experienced that inflation rate. I look back to some of the gas shortages back in the 70s and how gas was going up very quickly. But I was mowing lawns back then. I wasn't employed by corporate America. But the inflationary numbers, I would also say supply chain resiliency. And what I mean by that, leaders are combating inflation, but they're also, in some cases, as Tarek pointed out, dealing with product availability. So they can't secure inventory, can't secure product to feed their engine, their manufacturing operations. So we're challenged. Compound that with the Great Resignation, and yes, it's still occurring.
Yeah.
The job numbers have dramatically improved, but so you have inflation, you have product availability, you have the Great Resignation, you have thought leadership walking out the door for a number of reasons, and I can't think of a more challenging time that a number of leaders are facing right now.
Now, what is it? And this might be a skill, it might be a strategy, it might even be a tactic. I think we have a tendency to sort of poo-poo and look down on tactics sometimes. What would you say that procurement leaders, teams, professionals need to be preparing themselves to do in order to navigate these challenging times, not just very short term, but sort of medium to longer term, given all of these macro trends and external conditions that we're dealing with?
So I can go first. I think it's specifically the challenging thing is there's both an issue with supply and demand that I don't think, to Greg's point, anyone's seen before. So you have some organizations, depending on what space you're in, with a very high level of supply. Or you have, depending on if, say, for oil and gas, you might have the opposite, which is a very low level supply, but a very high level of demand. And that also might be regional focused. So what's happening, and I think this is I think this is a correlation of how good your team is. And almost to Greg's point is you have to have people that are thinking in a very regionally specific area of how do you handle these challenges and how are they suited to the challenges? Because the challenge in, say, Germany is going to be very different than a challenge in, say, North America. And I think, organizations are having to figure out how to adjust this, as well as, a large part of manufacturing and supply from China is on and off lines with their zero COVID policies. So you're seeing firsthand people having to adopt not only new ways of manufacturing, new ways of logistics and importing, and then also some companies like i.e. Peloton that have way too many bikes.
Yes.
And are dealing with a bullwhip effect. So it really is the essence of the team you have, because only one leader can focus on so much. And so, one thing that I've seen the smartest people do is really, first look at the people they have in the seat. How do they up level the people? How do they bring in people to, that have experience with this? So i.e. more supply, more demand, et cetera. And then how do they adjust? And I think being able to then look at your processes that you have and think, hey, these processes were an old company that's been established 100 years ago. Do these processes fit us today? If not, how do I engage the C-suite to immediately change them? And then also, do I have the tools, i.e. software, like Fairmarkit, that can help accommodate those challenges? Because, just going and outsourcing something or using a consultant to help you with something isn't going to do the trick, especially if you need to make a very quick pivot on a dime. That's at least what I'm seeing in the conversations that I'm overhearing.
Well, and it's interesting, Tarek, that you bring up Peloton, because literally yesterday they made the announcement that they're no longer going to manufacture their own bikes and treadmills. They had initially, in response to everyone going home and gyms being closed, every single person had a Peloton, or was at least on a waiting list for one. And so in order to thwart some of these supply chain disruptions, they said, okay, we're going to invest. We're going to do all of our own manufacturing, and we're going to do it in the US. And both because of the inventory backlog that you mentioned, and also because of maybe an uncertain demand future, they're now working with a third-party manufacturer to do all of that work. And I'll admit, the news is very new, so there hasn't been a ton of coverage. The first thought that went through my mind when I read that story was, I wonder if it will be procurement that manages that relationship, or will it be someone else in the company, because it is so unbelievably important to simply them being able to operate. Tarek, you had kind of mentioned them, so I don't know if you have any thoughts or a guess or what that type of strategy change might mean for them, because I'm sure other companies have gone on a similar bumpy journey.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing it. A parallel would be you're seeing it in the semiconductor industry,
Yes.
just in reverse. And it's an interesting time, I think, because it really separates people who are more proactive with their careers and proactive with getting a seat at the table, versus procurement professionals who just take orders. And so, to your point, I think it really depends on the individual that's at the seat. So either they can manage that relationship and be proactive in that, or they can find their way just managing contracts and looking over legal agreements and kind of walking their way out of the door.
Mm.
And so it's an interesting thing of the role that procurement especially is playing coming into it. Because what we're seeing is with our best-in-class customers, so take BP, for example, they're becoming a global energy company. And, their origin is British-Dutch back in Azerbaijan hundreds of years ago, predating World War I. They're now seeing a different future where they have to figure out how to accommodate their customers, and their customers want cleaner sources of energy, be it natural gas, hydrogen projects, wind, et cetera. And so their procurement team is having to be strategic with less people. And what does that mean? That means integrating new methods of production, integrating them into their older supply chain systems, looking at updating their current supply chain systems. And so when you see customers on the forefront of being, a leader for the industry and being able to take workload off of other teams, that's really what not only gets you at the seat at the table, but moves supply chain front and center. And, an old parallel to that, in my opinion, would be Apple. You see Tim Cook is the CEO,
Yeah.
and that's because Tim Cook took the vertical manufacturing where they would outsource specific components, and then eventually they're making the chips. And the improved production of like an M2 chip for a MacBook is just such a massive gain for them. And you can see how by having their supply chain front and center and being an innovator in the space and figuring out how to cut costs but also increase the performance of their business and their products has really, I say, catapulted Tim's career and other people on their teams. And so I think it really depends on the individual at the company, but the individuals who are really going out and making it happen are having so much success right now, at least what we're seeing.
Now, Tarek, let me ask you this question, and then Greg, I'll actually come to you with the same question to get your point of view. This morning, we've talked about inflation, we've talked about Peloton, we've talked about global supply chain challenges. Now, to me, that's exciting. I've always been sort of a newsy person, but if anyone in procurement preferred sort of the heads down, safe, insular, internal way of working, that is probably not where we're headed. How do you stay educated? Is it reading newspapers? Is it trade journals? Do you have a tight network of people that you talk to stay? I mean, we can't all read everything, right? How do you inform yourself so that you can either advise companies about the strategies they should employ, or so that you can share opinions and provide insight on topics like the ones that we've talked about today? Tarek, let me start with you on that.
So I listen to a lot of, I split it out. So I listen to podcasts. I try to read news. I set up a lot of Google alerts, and that's everything at a macro level, and then even down on specific verticals or specific customers that we work with. And so I try to always stay attuned to a lot of our customers' businesses. Whether it's Walgreens, AT&T, you name it. And so I'm always trying to stay close to how they're operating and how they're trying to seek improvements. I'm also, trying to be educated on the trends that our customers are seeing from a vertical aspect, so that, I can be a resource, also offer an opinion, and, try to help a customer if we can with our solution.
Same question to you, Greg. How do you prepare yourself from an information standpoint to provide the support you need to provide and to have the conversations that I'm positive you're having on a regular basis?
Yeah, the concern is information overload. So, to Tarek's point, how you consume information needs to be best suited to how you learn. You're a tactile learner, visual, etc. I read quite a bit. I also network. I talk to the analysts. I also listen to several podcasts. And then, believe it or not, I attend conferences. The hallway conversations at a conference are the best source of information. Talking to your peers, understanding what their challenges are and how they're confronting.
So, as we start to wind down our time, Tarek, I want to have the opportunity to present you with, well, it's actually a choice of questions. And this is something that every guest that joins me on the Sourcing Hero has an opportunity to share their perspective on. So you have a choice. Either how would you personally define the idea of a sourcing hero? Or if you'd like to comment on something a little bit broader, what would you say heroism looks like in a business context?
Those are both great questions. So maybe I can try to incorporate both, like
Sure.
heroism. What does it look like? I think it's always being very proactive in what you're doing, bringing new solutions to the table, not always just going with groupthink. And I think that almost, is what a sourcing hero is. Just because something has been done the last few years at your enterprise doesn't mean it has to continue to be done that way. And so, it's very invigorating for me as a founder of a business to work with those people. And I'm sure it's invigorating for them to work with, hopefully, people like myself and Greg. And the fun part is, as much of craziness is going on in the world, it's getting better every single day. We're going from globalism to maybe a little bit less than that, but the world's still getting better, Healthcare is great. Everything is getting better than where it was 50 to 100 years ago. And, the way we operate as a business, the way we manage people, the way we incorporate, diversity of thought, diversity of cultures into our businesses is just getting better and better. And, I see people that encompass that sourcing heroism, not only in the work that they do, but the work outside. And for me, it's a really positive thing that excites me every day when I go to work.
And that's so great to hear, right? Because so many times, and we've talked a lot about the news, it's easy to focus on headlines, which have a tendency to be, if not negative, then at least alarmist, because that's what sells the news. Exactly.
It sells. Like, nobody wants to click and hear positive things that are going on. Like, I live in New York. It's nobody ever celebrates the small local business who's been employed for 40 years and they just had record-breaking revenue. The news wants to forecast the one 40-year-old business who's going out of business, right? and it's just, I think if you look at it almost as the opposite, like opposites day on everything, it's really positive.
Absolutely. Now, Tarek, for people that have listened in today who don't know you or perhaps not connected to you, what is the best way for them to reach out or to get in touch?
Yeah, so last time I gave my cell phone number out, and that was mixed with mixed reviews. But if people do, it's 734-272-8623. You can always call or text me. But if not, I'm on Twitter, Tarek Alaruri. I'm on LinkedIn. My email's Tarek@Fairmarkit. I like to be a pretty approachable person, so don't hesitate to ping me with any questions, thoughts, or anything. If you didn't like what I say too, open for constructive criticism.
Although I would like to offer up, as the official host of this podcast, that if I hear anybody was impolite to Tarek, you're all in a lot of trouble. So if you do decide to call or text him, please be nice, please be constructive. He's offering up his cell phone number, which no one has ever done on the Sourcing Hero before. So let's reward that openness with positive, constructive dialogue. Greg, how about you? You've changed seats since we spoke last. What is the best way for people to get in touch?
Well, since Tarek set the standard, 916.
Here we go.
916-462-7172 is my mobile. Greg Tennyson at Fairmarkit.com, and Tennyson like Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you for your courage in putting those numbers out there. You'll have to let me know if you get anything interesting back.
Last time it worked. Just saying. Last time somebody reached out to me and, we're engaged with them possibly buying our platform. So never say never.
Absolutely. Never say never. Nice to end on a positive note. Tarek and Greg, thank you both so much for being here with me on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.